The Welrod pistol looked like nothing more than a piece of industrial pipe. No elegant lines, no gleaming finish, and, on its .32 caliber versions, no conventional trigger guard. By any conventional standard, it was among the ugliest firearms issued to British forces. It was also built for one of war's most deliberate jobs, killing at close range without the report of the shot immediately exposing the shooter. The object itself makes the case. A 9mm Welrod Mk I measured 365 millimetres from end to end, just over 14 inches, and only 34 millimetres across. Yet its rifled barrel measured 3.25 inches. A published Mk I specification gives the suppressor assembly as nearly 12 inches long. The greater part of the weapon was therefore not a barrel, grip, or operating mechanism in the normal pistol sense. It was expansion space, baffles, and rubber seals arranged to control hot gas. The earlier .32 ACP Welrod Mk II and Mk IIA were shorter, about 310 millimetres or 12.2 inches, but looked even less like ordinary handguns. Their long cylindrical body sat above a narrow rubber-covered grip. At the rear, a knurled cylindrical knob operated the bolt. On top, the sights were little more than a rear notch and front post, sometimes marked with luminous paint for low-light use. The grip concealed another surprise. It was the magazine. A 9mm Mk I carried 6 cartridges in its single-stack magazine. The .32 caliber Mk II and Mk IIA carried 8. The operator's hand wrapped around the ammunition supply itself, beneath a rubber sheath that also incorporated a grip safety. Remove that grip magazine assembly, and the remaining object became a tube with a recessed muzzle at one end and a bolt knob at the other. Specialist descriptions compared the Welrod to plumbing or a bicycle pump. That resemblance is well supported. Claims that agents routinely fooled guards by presenting one as a working pipe or pump aren't. The weapon didn't need a documented disguise routine to look unfamiliar. Its external shape had already abandoned almost every visual feature that tells an observer: pistol. That wasn't carelessness, it was engineering made visible. The Special Operations Executive, formally sanctioned by the War Cabinet on 22nd of July 1940, had been created for sabotage and subversion against the enemy overseas, for supporting resistance movements, and for clandestine warfare in occupied territory. Winston Churchill's private instruction to Hugh Dalton, "Go and set Europe ablaze," became the phrase most associated with SOE, even though its formal remit was broader and more bureaucratic. Behind those words stood a practical problem. An agent dropped into occupied Europe depended on local people for food, forged papers, a bed, transport, messages, and a place to hide a radio. A resistance network could include a courier, a printer, a rail worker, a farmer, and a wireless operator transmitting to Britain. One recognizable pistol shot could draw patrols toward all of them. The danger was especially severe because occupation wasn't a conventional front line. German military units, security police, collaborators, informers, curfews, identity checks, and local militias made ordinary movement dangerous. In France, the German occupation and the Vichy regime built a system of censorship, surveillance, requisitioning, arrests, hostage shootings, and collective punishment. The milice, created by Vichy authorities in early 1943, worked alongside German security forces and took part in torture and executions of resistance suspects. SOE agents weren't simply asked to fight. They had to remain unidentifiable long enough to organize sabotage and maintain a network. Non-firearm methods existed. A knife, club, garrote, poison, or chloroform could be used in particular circumstances. But those methods required time, access, control over the target, or physical strength at the decisive moment. A firearm could act across a doorway, down a corridor, or from the other side of a small room. The problem was that a conventional handgun announced itself in several different ways. First came the muzzle blast, high-pressure propellant gases bursting out into the air. A fast bullet could add a sonic crack if it passed the speed of sound. A self-loading pistol added the metallic noise of a slide cycling backward and forward. Then came the empty case, the impact, the body, the witnesses, and the search. The Welrod's answer was to remove as many of those signatures as its designers could. SOE already possessed suppressed weapons, including suppressed versions of the Sten submachine gun. Major Hugh Quentin Alain Reeves, the engineer credited with designing the Welrod, also worked on the Sten Mark II-S suppressor. The suppressed Sten had a ported barrel and an integral suppressor that reduced muzzle blast and lowered projectile velocity. It was useful for raids and resistance work. But it solved a different tactical problem. A Sten was an open-bolt blowback submachine gun. Its heavy bolt moved when the weapon fired, creating mechanical noise that no muzzle suppressor could erase. It was also longer, bulkier, and intended for a weapon roll beyond a single close-range shot. Suppressed Stens had their own limitations. Specialist accounts describe heating problems, and period descriptions noted a distinct hissing sound when fired. Published claims sometimes assign suppressed Stens a figure near 127 to 130 decibels. The surviving evidence does not provide a traceable, matched test method for that number, so it shouldn't be stacked neatly beside Welrod figures. The distinction matters without the scoreboard. A suppressed Sten reduced the signature of a submachine gun. The Welrod was built to make one carefully placed handgun shot harder to identify as a gunshot at all. That required a purpose-built weapon, not an existing pistol with a tube threaded onto its muzzle. The work took place at Station 9, SOE's Research, Development and Special Equipment Organisation. Its workshops operated at the Frythe, a country house site in the Welwyn area of Hertfordshire, north of London. Some accounts call the site near Welwyn, others say near Welwyn Garden City. The cautious description is the accurate one. The Frythe stood in the Welwyn area, where guarded workshops, laboratories, civilian scientists, craftsmen, and military personnel developed equipment for clandestine war. Station 9 products often bore the prefix Well: the Wellbike motorcycle, the Wellman midget submarine, the Well freighter, the Well gun, and the Welrod. Major Hugh Reeves was one of the station's most productive engineers. A post-war document created to ensure proper credit for Station 9 inventions identified Reeves as the Welrod's inventor, correcting older accounts that had given the design to Major John Dolphin. Reeves also worked on fluorescent night sights, the sleeve gun, the Well gun, and the Sten suppressor. The Welrod program emerged late in 1942. Specialist research places a prototype concept in January 1943 and production samples in April 1943. That speed reflects the urgency of SOE's work, but it shouldn't suggest improvisation. The Welrod's crude exterior concealed an integrated system in which ammunition, barrel, suppressor, bolt, magazine, and grip had to work together. Start with the cartridge. The first main production Welrods were chambered for .32 ACP, also known as 7.65mm Browning. The larger 9mm Parabellum version came later, despite being designated the Mark I, while the .32 versions were called Mark II and Mark II-A. Welrod nomenclature is one of the reasons the weapon is so often misdescribed. The shorter .32 Mark II came before the longer 9mm Mark I, and the feature set changed with the caliber. The 9mm Mark I had a trigger guard. The .32 Mark II and Mark II-A generally didn't. A photograph of a 14-inch 9mm Welrod can't be used as proof that every Welrod lacked a trigger guard, just as a photograph of an unguarded .32 can't establish the dimensions of the larger Mark I. Both versions shared the same central principle: reduce projectile velocity and manage propellant gas before it could produce a sharp report. Inside the long outer tube sat a short barrel with radial ports. On the 9mm Mark I, the barrel was 3.25 inches long. Sources differ over the exact number of ports, usually giving a range of 16 to 20, but their function is clear. Before the bullet reached the muzzle, propellant gas bled outward through those ports into the surrounding expansion chamber. That changed two things. Instead of allowing all the gas to follow the projectile directly out of the barrel, the Welrod diverted much of it into a larger enclosed volume. Pressure fell as the gas expanded. At the same time, the porting helped lower bullet velocity, keeping the projectile below the speed of sound with the intended ammunition. The exact figure of 290 meters per second is often repeated for 9mm Welrod ammunition, but the surviving material does not establish one universal velocity across every variant, load, and test condition. Subsonic operation is the stronger fact. The Welrod was designed to avoid the supersonic crack that a muzzle suppressor alone can't remove. A sonic crack is generated by the bullet moving through air faster than sound. It does not come from the muzzle, so it can't be fully silenced by trapping gas behind the bullet. The Welrod therefore addressed the problem before the projectile entered open air. Behind the ports lay expansion space. Ahead of them lay a stack of metal baffles or discs, followed near the muzzle by rubber wipes. Sources vary on the precise baffle count between variants, generally describing 14 to 18 metal elements. The robust point is the sequence. Chambers, barriers, and wipes force the remaining gases to expand, change direction, lose pressure, and escape more gradually. The tube wasn't a barrel shroud, it was the weapon's acoustic engine. A conventional pistol is designed around a barrel, a frame, a slide or cylinder, and a grip. The Welrod gave most of its external length to the suppressor because suppressing a gunshot required volume. The longer tube allowed gas more room to expand before meeting the outside air. Its strange silhouette was the physical consequence of that decision. Then came the wipes. 3 solid rubber discs sat near the muzzle. The 32 Welrod technical study identifies the rubber as Linetex A, though the material is less important than the mechanism. When a bullet passed through fresh wipes, it perforated them. The rubber then closed around and behind the projectile as far as it could, resisting the direct escape of propellant gases. That temporary seal was why a freshly serviced Welrod could be exceptionally quiet. It was also why the weapon couldn't remain at peak performance indefinitely. Every round punctured and eroded the rubber. Each successive bullet enlarged the path through which gas could escape. The baffles still worked after the wipes deteriorated, and the Welrod remained quieter than an unsuppressed pistol. But its most remarkable sound reduction depended on consumable rubber components being in good condition. The Welrod wasn't a one-shot pistol, though period language often made it sound like one. Some manuals and descriptions called it a single-shot weapon because it wasn't self-loading. Pulling the trigger fired 1 round. The action didn't cycle itself. But the weapon was magazine-fed and repeating. Its 6-round 9mm or 8-round 32 magazine remained in the grip, ready to feed the next cartridge after the operator worked the bolt. The rear knob controlled that process. The user rotated it, pulled it rearward to extract and eject the spent case, drove it forward to chamber a fresh round, then rotated it back into lock. The Welrod's bolts stayed closed and stationary when the shot was fired. That was a major part of the silence system. A semi-automatic pistol uses the energy of the shot to send it slide backward, extract the case, compress a spring, cock the mechanism, then drive the slide forward again. Those moving parts create metallic noise at the exact moment the operator may want as little noise as possible. A suppressed Sten's open bolt brought an even more substantial moving mass into the equation. The Welrod made the shooter perform that mechanical work later. A user could fire 1 round without the immediate clatter of a cycling action. If another shot was necessary, the bolt had to be worked manually. That made follow-up fire slower, but it separated the loudest event, the discharge, from the next mechanical movement. The mechanism therefore imposed discipline. 6 or 8 rounds didn't turn the Welrod into a close-quarter automatic weapon. Every follow-up shot required a deliberate sequence of turning, pulling, pushing, and locking the rear bolt. The trade was clear: reduced signature in exchange for speed. The strongest historical sound claim is equally clear about its conditions and equally unclear about its universality. American riflemen reported a .32 Welrod muzzle blast measurement of 73 decibels. A U.S. Army suppressor evaluation text includes a heading for a 9mm silenced Welrod pistol with new rubber baffles using reduced charge round, measured 5 meters to the side, with the number 73 attached to the test record. That figure is often turned into a simple headline. The Welrod made a 9mm shot as quiet as a cough, a car door closing, or a finger snap. The historical record does not support treating those comparisons as laboratory equivalents. The National Museum of the U.S. Air Force describes the report of its .32 caliber Mk I as "snap of a finger." That is a museum display phrase, useful as an impression of the weapon's intended effect, but it isn't a standard acoustic measurement. The frequently repeated 73 decibel result also depends on fresh rubber wipes, reduced charge ammunition, microphone position, measurement direction, and equipment whose reporting standard isn't fully available. A modern instrumented .32 Welrod test produced about 122.8 decibels, reporting a 34 decibel reduction from a control pistol. That result is dramatically higher than 73. The difference may involve ammunition, wipe condition, fresh versus worn components, microphone placement, peak versus average readings, old equipment, and differing measurement conventions. Decibels are logarithmic, and firearm measurements are highly sensitive to test conditions. A number taken 5 meters to the side can't automatically be compared with a measurement near the muzzle, in another direction, with another cartridge, from a weapon whose wipes have already been punctured repeatedly. The responsible conclusion is still impressive. With fresh wipes and intended ammunition, the Welrod could be far quieter and far less recognizable as gunfire than a conventional pistol. It wasn't literally silent. The firing pin still struck the primer. The bullet still made impact noise. The operator still had to work the bolt for another shot. But the violent muzzle blast that usually announces a handgun discharge had been reduced to a much smaller and more ambiguous sound. That is why the weapon looked the way it did. The long tube held the suppressor. The short barrel created room for expansion chambers. The ports diverted and slowed gas. The manual bolt removed automatic action noise at the instant of firing. The magazine served as the grip, reducing external furniture. The rubber sheath made that magazine practical to hold. The detachable grip turned the remaining weapon into an even less obvious object. The Welrod also lacked normal national and manufacturer branding. It was a sanitized weapon, intended to obscure British origin if captured. Surviving examples do carry cryptic markings and serial numbers, often hidden beneath the tube near the grip, but not the ordinary BSA or national markings expected on a military firearm. Birmingham Small Arms, especially its Small Heath Works in Birmingham, is identified as a principal manufacturer. Yet the weapon's production history remains frustratingly incomplete. That incompleteness isn't proof that every record remains classified. Some records survive, but secrecy, lost paperwork, scattered serial numbers, contracts and post-war production all make a single, definitive total impossible. The Welrod's recessed muzzle reveals just how close its designers expected it to be used. The front face was hollowed or concave, allowing the weapon to be pressed against a target without blocking the bore. That feature wasn't useful for long-range shooting. It was for contact shots, where placing the muzzle against clothing or a body could further contain sound and remove the chance of a miss at a few inches distance. Imperial War Museums lists an 8-yard recommended operational range for .32 caliber Welrod examples. Other references give maximum or daylight figures out to 23 meters or roughly 25 yards. Those are outer capabilities, not the weapon's identity. The Welrod's natural geography was a doorway, stairwell, corridor, sentry post, or small room. At 8 yards, a person crossing an ordinary living room would cover much of the distance. At contact range, the recessed muzzle mattered more than the simple sights. A user didn't need a fast draw, a high magazine capacity, or the rapid follow-up shots of a battlefield pistol. They needed a weapon able to deliver a controlled shot while limiting the immediate warning. Its intended purpose was grimly explicit. Station 9 described the Welrod as an assassination weapon for irregular forces and resistance groups. It wasn't a general sidearm. It wasn't a sniper pistol. It wasn't a glamorous gadget merely because modern video games made its silhouette familiar. The weapon entered the war through SOE supply channels in 1943. A memorandum dated the 18th of September 1943 reported that the British had 1,000 Welrods in production and requested 200 immediately, with 50 per month afterward, for American use. SOE, the American Office of Strategic Services, and resistance organizations all received Welrods. The strongest documented European connection is Denmark. American riflemen reported that Welrods were airdropped to Denmark and Holland. Small Arms Review reported that a Welrod in Denmark's National Museum was used by a Danish underground group during the Second World War. Small Arms Review also reported a Welrod in Denmark's National Museum used by a Danish underground group, although the accessible account does not identify a named operation or target. That level of evidence supports Danish underground use. It does not support attaching the weapon to every famous Danish resistance unit, every reported execution, or a particular cafe or street killing without a traceable record. Claims of named French Mk I, Norwegian, or Holger Dansk Welrod operations circulate widely, but the supplied evidence is much thinner. SOE supplied weapons across occupied Europe, and agents worked with resistance movements in France, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Yugoslavia, and elsewhere. That broad history is beyond dispute. The fact that a particular resistance action involved a Welrod requires separate proof. The weapon's value didn't depend on grand stories. Its tactical advantage was already clear in the documented design. An agent or resistance fighter facing a sentry had previously confronted an unpleasant choice. Close in with a knife and risk a struggle. Use a club and hope the target fell quietly. Use poison and require access, preparation, and time. Fire an ordinary pistol and alert everyone within hearing distance. A Welrod could create distance from the target while reducing the most obvious acoustic evidence of the attack. That didn't erase the risks. A body still had to be found. A missing guard still triggered an alarm. A spent cartridge could still become evidence if left behind. The Welrod's manual action could help an operator control the timing of ejection, but it didn't guarantee that the operation left no trace. Escape routes, false papers, local support, and discipline mattered as much as the weapon itself. Neither did a suppressed shot solve the wider moral problem of clandestine killing. Resistance warfare wasn't a clean divide between heroic fighters and uncomplicated villains. Historians caution against romanticizing armed resistance because targeted violence could bring reprisals against civilians, deepen local political conflicts, and involve uncertain intelligence about the person chosen as a target. The assassination of Reinhard Heydrich in 1942 demonstrates the scale of that danger, even though it wasn't a Welrod operation. Czechoslovak agents trained and dispatched from Britain mortally wounded Heydrich in Prague. German reprisals included mass arrests, executions, and the destruction of Lidice and Ležáky. The National Army Museum notes that SOE operations often depended on civilian support and could lead to brutal reprisals against local populations. That context matters because the Welrod was designed to make deliberate close-range killing more feasible. Engineering didn't make the act clean, it made the shot less conspicuous in the moment immediately after it was fired. We can't honestly say the Welrod terrorized every civilian in occupied Europe. There is no evidence that the weapon was publicly known across the continent, that ordinary people recognized its silhouette, or that informants everywhere stopped cooperating because of it. Its psychological consequence was narrower and more tactical. A low-signature weapon made selected people more vulnerable in places they might otherwise have treated as controlled space. A sentry at a guarded door, a collaborator in an office, a police official in a corridor, or a target inside a building could no longer assume that the sound of a shot would instantly raise an alarm. That delay was the weapon's strategic contribution. A conventional gunshot creates an immediate shared fact. Everyone nearby knows something violent has happened, and they know roughly where. The Welrod's design aimed to postpone that recognition. Seconds gained at a doorway could allow the shooter to clear a room. Seconds gained in a street could allow a courier to disappear into civilian traffic. Seconds gained before a guard post understood what had happened could protect the larger network behind the operation. That isn't bomber-scale terror. It's the arithmetic of clandestine war. One reduced signature, one delayed response, one chance to leave before the alarm takes shape. The Welrod is often measured against other suppressed pistols, especially the American high-standard HDM. That comparison is useful only if it remains narrow. The HDM was a .22 long rifle semi-automatic pistol with an integral suppressor. It used a different cartridge, a different action, and a different balance between quietness and terminal effect. Some historical comparative trials reportedly judged a suppressed high standard quieter than the Welrod through subjective observation. The often repeated claim of approximately 90 decibels for the HDM lacks a fully documented, directly comparable measurement method in the material available here. German suppressed pistol comparisons are less secure still. There is no reliable representative dataset supporting the common claim that German designs rarely improved beyond 115 decibels. Those figures don't belong in a clean ranking table with the Welrod's disputed 73 decibel test claim. The Welrod does not require that scoreboard to stand apart. Its strength lay in the combination of a manual action that stayed still during firing, a very large integral suppressor, a ported short barrel, and a magazine that allowed repeated shots without making the weapon self-loading. The high standards .22 cartridge and semi-automatic action represented another approach to clandestine work. The suppressed Sten was a compact submachine gun meant for raids and short bursts. The Welrod was more austere, a close contact weapon designed around the possibility that one shot had to be decisive and difficult to identify. That specialization carried a mechanical cost. The rubber wipes were consumable. Fresh wipes gave the best seal around the projectile and therefore the greatest reduction in escaping gas. Specialist descriptions commonly place the strongest suppression in the first 10 to 15 shots. Other modern accounts discuss around 10 shots or as many as 20 under particular configurations. Those aren't competing magical limits. They describe a system affected by ammunition, wipe material, storage, age, maintenance, and how much deterioration an operator could accept. The sensible conclusion is that peak performance lasted for a limited number of shots, generally a few dozen or fewer. not for an unlimited service life. As the wipes were punctured and eroded, the seal weakened. More gas passed through the perforations behind the bullet. The weapon became progressively louder, though its baffles and expansion chambers continued to reduce sound. The Welrod didn't suddenly become useless after one threshold. It moved from extraordinary suppression toward the performance of a more conventional suppressed weapon. The suppressor could be serviced. On the 9mm Mark I, sections could be separated, allowing components to be replaced. But servicing required replacement materials, time, and a safe place to work. Those weren't resources an agent could count on behind enemy lines. Every quiet shot damaged the very seal responsible for making it so quiet. That fact changes the familiar image of the Welrod. It wasn't an endlessly whispering superweapon. It was a carefully maintained tool designed for a narrow number of exceptionally quiet shots. The limitation didn't undermine the design. It revealed the design's priorities. SOE didn't need an assassin to fire hundreds of rounds. It needed a weapon capable of doing one difficult job under conditions where a normal gunshot could compromise an operation. Production totals show the same frustrating mix of evidence and uncertainty. The National Museum of the US Air Force says the exact number made is unknown, but believed to be approximately 2,800. The Australian War Memorial estimates fewer than 2,800. Other studies and collector estimates reach toward 14,000, using serial ranges, contract figures, and possible post-war production. Surviving serial numbers are scattered and non-sequential. They can't be used as a simple production counter. The responsible answer is that at least several thousand Welrods were produced, while larger totals may combine wartime and post-war output. Even the surviving guns reflect the secrecy surrounding their manufacture. No overt British markings, no BSA branding across the body, cryptic symbols, hidden serials, and incomplete paperwork. The Welrod's post-war career is clearer in broad outline than in every claimed detail. It remained useful during the Cold War in British and American hands. Some sources report post-war British and American use, but the accessible evidence does not establish a firm endpoint for British Special Forces service. Claims of later service exist, but the accessible evidence is too thin to turn those into an unbroken, confidently documented story. Its presence in 1982 is enough to show the endurance of the original idea. Nearly 4 decades after Station 9 had begun the project, special operators still had use for a manually cycled, magazine-fed, integrally suppressed pistol optimized for very short distances. The strategic setting had changed from Nazi-occupied Europe to Cold War and post-war conflicts. The technical problem had not. How do you reduce the visible and audible evidence of a handgun shot when the target is close, the operation is covert, and immediate detection could endanger more than the shooter? The Welrod's answer was brutally direct. A short, ported barrel bled gas into expansion chambers. Metal baffles broke up that gas flow. 3 rubber wipes sealed behind the projectile while they were fresh. A manually operated rear bolt eliminated self-loading action noise during the shot. A grip magazine kept 6 9mm or 8.32 caliber rounds available without giving the weapon the bulky shape of a conventional pistol. A recessed muzzle allowed contact use. The long tube contained the whole system. It wasn't a crude pistol with a suppressor attached. It was a suppressor designed to fire a pistol cartridge. The pipe-like appearance was the visible cost of making silence part of the weapon's function. Its wipes wore out. Its peak sound figures depended on ideal conditions. Its production record remained incomplete. Its effect was never the public terror created by bombers, artillery, or occupation armies, but for the smaller and more dangerous world of safe houses, checkpoints, stairwells, guarded doors, and resistance cells. The Welrod changed what a shot could mean. It could be lethal without immediately sounding like gunfire.